Yeah, I see the box.
Okay. Start the music.
You're about to witness the strength of creep knowledge.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the origin episode, I guess you could say, of Slip Into the Night. I've been teasing this show for quite a while. Yes, you all can see me today.
Hello. Annie M.
And I've been teasing this show for a while. I've been wanting to do a show that focuses a little more on the I hate to use the word spiritual side of things. I think that word's kind of a little overused. But I wanted to do something that, deals with things such as ritual, magic, Wicca, shamanism, the more occult side of the Fortean topics. Because it's a passion of mine that I've had for a long time, that started when I was a teenager. I'd always questioned things. I mean, my go-to story with anyone, if I'm telling them about how I came into getting into what they called back in the quote unquote New Age religions, but the I don't like that name either. So I'm just I fell into it because I had questions and I saw these books, a lot of which were bullshit. There's quite a few books that are written out there on these subjects. They're full of crap. But there was a guy that I had talked to when I was really young who had told me, he's like, if you buy a book, he's like, and if you only get like one little piece of information that makes sense to you and changes your way of thinking and makes you grow, then that book was worth it. Whether or not it was filled with a bunch of bullshit. I mean, if you were able to see past the bullshit. But a lot of it is. So we wanted to do this show, Holly and I, and this is, we're going to call her Holly Go Nightly.
Oh, you don't have to
that was
use
your
that.
choice. No, that was your choice. And I'm sticking to it.
Joking around.
And Holly is, I don't know if I would call it, I mean, like I said, I have problems with labels when it comes to those things. I know you're into shamanism. I don't know if you would consider yourself a shaman.
I would consider, yeah. That answer that question is kind of like wide and deep.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? At some level, I think everyone is a shaman, or has the capacity to be a shaman. Not everybody
It's wide and
studies
deep,
it.
like
Yeah.
a blue whale's vagina.
Yeah, I suppose. I don't know.
And when
in my biological studies, Chris, I don't know about that. But for me, on the shamanism thing, it's something that I got interested in. I have studied it in classes to the point where I am kind of an initiate and a shaman, but not a professional level shaman. So
right.
So I do practice on my own. I've studied it for quite a while, but I don't have paying clients.
Right. And when I first met you, you the vibe I got from you is you were far more into astrology at that point in time. Like that was like the big thing on your brain. And whenever I hear you talking to somebody new, you immediately go to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to see that as your default.
Yeah, I mean, I've dabbled in a lot of things. I think I kind of got my spiritual curiosity peaked a bit later in life, like within like the last 10 years, and feeling like I needed something different, and have studied various things on my own, for my own kind of self development. And so, if people don't know me, and but to give them some background, is that I have worked in the corporate environment and got very drained in this office job where I was an investigator into basically like complaints or excursions in a very
Ah,
high tech scientific environment.
you get chewed up
And
by the machine.
I got chewed up by the machine a bit, and needed to kind of find my way again and find some meaning. And I have studied various things that, such as Reiki, mediumship, psychic development, all the while still working is in a very professional um, field.
Setting.
So kind of having like this double life thing where,
Oh yeah.
you
Well,
know, like,
I think for a lot of people who wound up getting in or questioning things like in that fashion, they wind up separating themselves from family, work. Some people try to integrate it. Other people just kind of like, they're really quiet about it, or they just don't
mhm,
talk about it.
yeah,
So I think it's almost kind of like living a double life in that sense. And for a lot of
mhm.
people, that's very hard.
Yeah. Well, the level of acceptance varies. So, some people, you kind of get a feel. You can talk to them about kind of exploring the more of the spiritual realm. The time I told my parents that I was taking a mediumship class and talking to spirits and learning what that was about and seeing if it had any validity to it for me, the table got really quiet.
Yeah.
It was very awkward.
And for the record, like there are things that Holly and I have disagreements on when it comes to these subjects, and or not so much disagreements. We have differing opinions on how these things work. So it's not like we're both like completely on the same page with everything on these subjects. Because as people know from listening to me, I am a huge skeptic. I'm a believer. Like I want to believe in things, and there are things that I've seen and I've experienced that have made me that keep me far more at the center line, maybe drifting over to I believe, kind of, sort of. Um, but I've always tried to keep a level head about it. Like one of the things I've always said is that these systems, these religious or spiritual systems, they're more of a way of self-improvement than anything else. I mean, if you want to, find a path and use it as a path to self-improvement, that's they're perfect for that. And will that in and of itself change your reality and things and make things better for you or in the direction that you want them? Of course they will. To think otherwise is stupid. It's a causality thing. You change something about you and make things more positive about you, and you're going to change other things, and that's just fact. But you're not going to do it just sitting there wishing and lighting a few candles, and that putting that intention into it is just directing the energy. You actually have to do something. That's the way I've always felt about it. I don't know what your exact thoughts on that whole thing are.
I do. I think that you have to be open, and um if you're ready to kind of, you have to be open and able to investigate possibly alternative ways of thinking and feeling and experiencing the world. So, for me, I would say I'm a fair level of a skeptic as well, where, a lot of my work has involved, compiling data, looking at the evidence, putting together argument papers.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, stepping into a room full of mediums saying, okay, well, show me how we're going to do this, is there's not that much evidence there. And it is all about personal experience. And
Yeah, and then one of the things that I've always liked about talking with you is that you you are this very believing person in these things, think of a better word in that moment, and it sounded horrible. But you have a logical approach to things, which I admire. That you have this ability of belief, and yet you still keep a logical approach to it. It's something I've always admired about you.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I try to be down to earth about it, and I try not to. I try to have a kind of a earthy perspective about things, and some things that I've experienced are just for me. Like no one else needs to know. Some of it is, you know, shared with other people, and then some of it we may come up on the show of things that I've experienced, and I'll be like very matter of fact about it. This is what I experienced. I've thought about it. It could be X, Y, and Z, and I still can't explain it.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know, I've had experiences that I can't explain, and had things happen. And like I said, that's kind of why I'd wanted to do this show, was to explore those avenues without having to drag Steve and Matt and everybody else who joins that program on, you know, the 40 and slip into those things. And also because a lot of those subjects can be touchy with people. So I just wanted to do it in a separate fashion. And you know, Holly and I have had several long, intense discussions about spirituality and the such. And so I just had asked her, like, you know, hey, would you like to do this? Because I had tried to pressure you into doing something yourself. Like I thought that you should use it as an outlet, get out there and start either talking to people or doing something with these, you know, astrology or shamanism or whatever.
mhm. Yeah, it's a little bit hard. Been a little bit hard on my own to kind of get that momentum going. So I appreciate. I think it's going to be an interesting collaboration.
Yeah.
Um, and what was I just thinking? I lost the thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
That happens to me all the time. Only for me, it's because of weed. So, but yeah, I finally had dug out my altar.
Mhm.
I used to practice ritual magic,
Mhm. Yeah.
um, and so I dug out my altar, and I'll get it up so that everyone can see what it is. It's a pretty elaborate piece. It took me a long time to do it, and I've had it for a really long time. I've had it since I was in my early 20s. So.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a bunch of other things that I have, you know, more than willing to share with everybody
Mhm.
on the program. But I really just wanted to like introduce what we're going to be doing, you know, see how well your audio works today, you know, kind of let
Mhm.
you introduce yourself to everybody. Now, you have an
Yeah.
art history background in college, right?
Yeah. I've studied various things, but my BA is in art history, so I've studied a lot of art, architecture. I really love the ancient stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
um,
Oh yeah, I mean,
and
we could definitely
yeah,
talk about that stuff as well, Holly.
yeah,
Like Gobekli Tepe and
yeah.
uh, did you catch I think you did catch the show we did on the Rickett structure, right?
Yeah, I swear we've talked about that before, but
Yeah, no, that's one I've never heard about.
oh yeah,
I'd never heard about the Rickett structure, and I tend to think that's more of a geological formation than anything else. But it is really fucking cool.
it's very cool where it looks like that lava bubbled up and then collapsed in the concentric circles.
Yeah,
And it's really interesting how, the stories of Atlantis from Plato and Solon are talking about how the original city structure was in these concentric circles. And, they talk about Atlantis having been most likely on the African continent because they recorded that there were elephants there. And we know that in the historic record there were elephants in this area of the Sahara, and it could have been more wet, more lush. So
yeah.
could there have? been more of a civilization built up on this, and could it have been wetter or even partially submerged, so that you have that concentric rings of water and land? It does seem possible. It's not, it says possible. Is it likely? It's probably very improbable,
Right.
but
It is
you
possible. People
it
people have done
is
stranger
possible.
things. Look at what they did with Tenochtitlan down in the Aztecs.
Mexico, yeah.
They built that city on a lake.
Hmm.
And this is ancient man. This isn't, they didn't have bulldozers and cranes and shit.
Yeah.
But the story of how that city was built is
Mhm.
that it was a bird. I can't remember the exact bird, if it was an eagle or what the fuck the bird was, but
Mhm.
they said, wherever this thing lands, that's where we're building the city, because that's
Yeah.
what good God, whatever the fucking God was. I haven't done any recent
Mhm.
research or have it in my brain, but
Right.
that I think it was it Quetzalcoatl? I don't know, but anyway.
Quetzalcoatl is one of the major deities of South America.
Right. So anyway, but it lands on something in the middle of the lake. So they built the whole city on the fucking lake.
Mhm.
They
Yeah.
moved all the earth. It's amazing what some of these early civilizations did.
Yeah, a lot of the Peruvian structures in like Sacsayhuaman in Cusco, those blocks are like 30-ton blocks, and they're fit together perfectly with
Yeah.
minimal seam tolerance. You could barely fit a piece of paper in between the seams, and you really have to wonder how people move these with, you know,
And that's
carts and
but you got to
people.
remember too, that's after like thousands of years or hundreds or thousands of years.
Yeah.
Like these tolerances are still holding up.
Yes, and the tolerances of some of the sculptures and of blocks in Pumapunko
Oh yeah.
are have machined quality tolerances that we in our civilization need to have, like lasers and like computers to achieve this kind of cutting skill. So it really kind of makes you wonder when you really look at the quality of the craftsmanship of some of these really old
Oh yeah.
sites.
And I've said before, I love Ancient Aliens, but I don't know if I buy into the fact that it was aliens or if it was just an advanced civilization of either us or another species on this planet. And I don't know.
Yeah,
You know,
we
I have
don't.
I have no idea.
Yeah, we don't know, and there's more and more evidence that there was an extreme cataclysm in the Younger Dryas period of
Hmm.
about I think 70,000 years ago, or was it 12,000? I don't have the numbers in front of me, but
Yeah, I think it
uh,
might. I think it might be 12 because
yeah, I think
I
12.
think Robert Schoch talks all the time about how that's where they kind of date the Sphinx back to because
Hmm.
of the water erosion.
Right. Yep.
Because that was a lush area at that time.
Hmm. And
So,
and there's other places in the Giza Plateau that show that kind of water erosion too.
mhm.
But they know that it's been really super dry there for a long time. So
Yeah, and the funny thing with that baffles me. Why these Egyptologists just fight against amending the history? They
I
just
think
they want to be right.
Well, I think it's that, but I think also some of it is cultural. Islam is a big religion, and it kind
Hmm.
of says that the beginning of the world was 6,000 years ago. And
Oh
if
yeah.
that's your dominant belief system, and that's like what the culture is, that makes it very, and many of the Egyptologists are, believe, my understanding is that that's their point of view, and so that makes it very difficult for them as scientists to say this is older than what Islam says the world is.
Yeah.
And I don't, and I have read that in multiple places, and I have watched some other documentaries on stuff,
Well,
and that is one of those things that they
it's
say is
it's been obvious throughout history how religion has tried to shape history, like in retrospect, not as it's going on. Well, as it's going on too, but I mean, if you want to deny that religious factions around the globe have not tried to revise history, then you need to check your fucking head.
Well, right, but it's not just religious. It's generally whoever is in power,
Right.
which historically has been, you know,
Religiously backed.
it often has a religious component to it, which is like the state government. And you kind of see that in Rome with the Roman
Oh yeah,
polytheistic, like Mars. The Roman god Mars was one of their big gods, Jupiter. So everything was tied into, the Roman um, belief system there, right back to the ancient Egyptians and Greeks. A lot of their writings are talking about, the high priest working with the governors and the king, and the king is like the semi-divine or divine representation of God on the planet. So it's very intermeshed. And one country wins and they write all the history, and you see that especially in Egypt, that they go out and they
oh yeah.
campaigns and conquer territories, and they write these big long um, monuments, all these hieroglyphics, and saying how it was this like great amazing thing by the pharaoh, and then you go and you slowly find other evidence to the contrary.
Yeah,
It's
well,
very common.
they thought their pharaohs were living gods.
Correct.
I mean, and that's a huge, a huge thing to do, like to put, which I listen, I don't buy it. Like I don't buy that these people were gods. I buy that they were flesh and blood people, and that they overused their power. They got power hungry, and they just started telling people, "Oh, we're fucking, we're omniscient. Go fuck yourself." I mean, that's how I've always thought about it. It's like it was an abuse of power by early man, and now we just put people in really high positions, and they still kind of get in a way deified. I think all your presidents and prime ministers in a way, because they're looked up to, because they have to be. I mean, even the people who don't agree with them still look to them because they're in charge.
Well, right, and their persona is everywhere. I mean, you see that with George Washington. His face is still on the coinage.
Mm-hmm.
And don't misunderstand me. He was a really important, great president, but some of what you would call like kind of imagery propaganda is somewhat deifying him.
Oh yeah.
And some of the other presidents where you put their images on the coinage. You have paintings in big important places, big statuary.
Well, it's something that we do, okay? And I'll tell a semi-personal story. When I was younger, when I was a senior in high school, my English teacher had asked all of us to write a biography of someone in our family, and one of the caveats was that it had to be somebody alive. And my grandfather passed away when I was 7. He died from a lung disease, and I'd always like heard about him, like, and I remembered him vaguely. Like I had like a few memories over, still, and I still have them of him when he was alive. I know a bunch of them aren't so good because it was when he was sick. But so I had asked her if she'd give me a special, if she'd allow me to do it on him. And I presented my case, and she was like, "Yeah, sure." And I explained to her it's because I wanted to get to know him. And so I started interviewing people in my family, and to do this thing. And bar none, everybody, all I heard was that he was the greatest man on the planet, could do no wrong. He was just to hear them talk about him, you would have swore they were talking about Jesus Christ. And that's what I found at age 17. I was like, what? And like, I would try to pry. I would like, and not because I wanted to destroy the man. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted him to be human. I wanted him to be like me. I wanted to know that, you know, I hadn't fallen so far from this deified figure, you know? So I just, and everybody, no, they wouldn't hear of it. I remember I'd asked one of my uncles one time, I was like, listen, man, I'm just like, come on. Like no. And it wasn't until one night, and it was my father, and we were sitting in the back field, and he had said, and you know, he told me, he's like, listen, of course he was, you know, of course he was human. He you know, Dad, my father was like, there was talk that he had liquor underneath the seat of his car sometimes, and so on and so forth. And I was like, oh, all right, so he was a human being, cool. And I didn't want to like write that shit. Like I didn't want to destroy my grandfather in print. Like I just wanted to know who he was. I wanted to connect with him in some way to know that, hey, you know, that I'm not this piece of shit in comparison to him. So, but we even do it in our little family groups. We deify people. And it is a problem, I think, because I think we should look at things way more realistically. You know, one thing that I've found is, you know, talking to my son about things in a realistic fashion. You know, sex, whatever the case may be. I never had that. Never. No one ever talked to me about anything in a real way. You know, I was a fucking kid. I was to be seen and not heard, and most times not seen either. But you know, I think we need that. We need to realistically discuss these things so that we don't wind up making those mistakes and deifying people that don't deserve it, or you know, making them so much larger than life that we believe they're a god.
Well, and part of the problem with that, I think, is that when you think someone is all that much better than you, no matter who it is, you self-judge, and you can turn it inwardly, and it can bring about feelings of shame and unworthiness or hurt that maybe are not really justified because that person is actually quite human, and you know, it's putting someone on a pedestal which may not actually be deserving. It's not, they have their own kind of foibles, and it can create a communication barrier where, you know, there's comparisons and stuff, and are you really worthy to, talking about certain things, and when it just needs to be kind of down to earth, human to human, these are what the facts are, and lay it on the line, and not foof it off, or drench it in shame or judgment, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And that gets back to, this idea of spiritual systems, the way I look at them as a way of self-improvement, and of realizing that we're all fuck ups. We all have issues, everybody. And realizing and just trying to figure out like what you should change in your life and how you should, do things a little more maybe positive, or maybe just in the direction that you want to go. And I think those systems are great for that, and great for getting rid of that shame.
Yeah.
And realizing, who we are. The biggest tenet is know thyself. Understand who you are, because people generally don't. they have this this very watered down version of themselves in their brain. And by watered down, I mean cartooned, colored, and fucking in 3D. They do not see themselves as they really are. Generally.
Yeah, well, it's easy to kind of get in a place of self-denial and really kind of, well, let's face it, it takes a lot of strength and bravery sometimes to look at those pain points
Mhm.
in our past, and it can be far more easy to just kind of forget that it's there and, like, not want to look at it, um, and just kind of go about your life and try to paint everything as a beautiful rosy picture.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know in my life, I certainly had gotten to the point where the pain became so unbearable that I could not continue to not look at it, and I had to do that kind of internal deep dive into my stuff. But that's like, in a way, kind of like going into that personal rabbit hole or down into the cellar and, like, looking around down there and taking a real good look at it and be like, is this really as bad as I think it is? And even if it is, you know, what am I going to do about it?
Mhm.
And I have come to have had times when I think, oh, this thing about me is just this terrible secret. And then I've really looked at it and it's actually not that big a deal.
Right.
And
And we all do that. We all
mhm,
demonize ourselves in that way.
yeah.
It's a lot of times when you feel like you're in trouble with something,
Mhm.
you overbloat the trouble. And then
Mhm.
when you have to face it, you're like, oh, that wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
The same idea.
Yeah.
Um, but I definitely do think that these systems, whatever the case may be, and you can use them in the converse way as well. You can use them to become a more horrible person,
Mhm.
if that be your decision. I mean, nobody can exactly control you. You are who you are, but these systems can be great for self improvement, and that's the one thing that I took out of it. Because when I was young, I was stupid. I was stupid and ignorant, and I thought that this meant power. And as I learned things, I was like, no, no, not really. So yes, but no, not in the way that I thought. Um, and I've said it before, on the 40 and slip, where I've talked about it, that I'm not like an insane advocate of Aleister Crowley, but he did have some interesting points. Um, and that goes back to that thing that my friend had told me about finding those little nuggets of truth in the
Mhm.
world, wherever they may be found. And one of the things that Crowley said was, if you look at life like it's a river, you can't change the course of the river when you're on it. You're not going to
Mhm.
build any dams as you're riding down the fucking river,
Agreed. Yeah.
but you can control where you're at and kind of look ahead a little bit and prepare yourself
Mhm.
and put yourself in a better position.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what he viewed magic as, was
Yeah.
finding that path, maybe of least resistance, maybe of more
Mhm.
resistance. You never know. Whatever the path is that you're looking for. Because some
Right.
people are looking for a harder, a bigger challenge. And some people are looking for an easier path.
Mhm. Yep. And some of that is just like, getting to know what you yourself are really looking for and what you really want. And we are kind of come into the world and we're brought up as children and we are exposed to all kinds of, like, preconditioning and, and enculturation, and the way my life has been developed is very much been because of, the childhood that I've had. And then we can kind of get to in the point when we're an adult and can make a decision of, is this really what we want or do we want something different? um you know some of the things that I learned in my childhood actually don't fit with who I am. But it took me a long time to be able to say, this is family stuff and it's okay, but I don't want to continue with this. And I'm, to try other things on to see what feels right for me. But we
Right.
often feel a lot of pressure from culture, from our friend groups, from our families to be a certain way, which maybe is not true to our inner essence.
Oh yeah. Yeah. People wear masks
Mhm.
all the time. It's a function of self, I think. Because we do hide this thing inside us. It's our ego protects us from it,
Mhm.
and it keeps us ignorant of it.
Mhm.
And then, but if you take a look and you start looking at yourself, you tend to start pulling that veil aside and realizing, the truth of yourself, which sometimes is very shocking to people.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that in one of the early books that I read, Modern Magic,
Mhm.
he says, when he talks about stripping away these negative parts of yourself, he's like, it's not an easy process.
Right.
Realizing something about you and then trying to change it. It's not easy to do that.
Mhm. And it's
Um,
not easy to be very authentically yourself. And one of my experiences in my own journey is meeting a lot of new age people, and there is a lot of new age thought out there, and it's kind of its own category of things of, well, you need to ascend, you need to be your highest light version of yourself, you need to be fifth dimensional, which
yeah.
kind of candy coats everything, and it almost like makes
That
you
talk
know
like that just reminds me of fucking Scientology. You got to get fifth dimensional. We got to get to the next tier. We got to spend 100 grand.
right, and we all that heavy stuff in your past, just forget about it, don't think about it, just move on.
Yeah,
Just
and for the record, like, if I'm not trying to endorse Scientology by saying this in any way, but if you look at the core idea behind Scientology and Dianet in the book Dianetics, trying to become clear, that idea is not a bad idea. Like trying to remove the negative things, the negative influences in your life, and striving to become what they term clear
mhm.
is not a bad idea. I think it's the structure around it, and obviously the guy who created it, but the core idea, it isn't a bad idea. Like stripping away and removing the negative things out of your life to become a more positive person. How is that wrong? But then you add all the e-meter stuff and the recording, and it's like, what? Like, why do we have to do that? Why am I paying you 50 grand to ascend?
Right, and then you have like no more friends and family because everyone you can't get along with you've pushed
Oh,
away, and then
they're repressive people. They have terms for all this. If you haven't
Ugh.
seen the Scientology movie, I can't remember the exact name of it right now. But woof, ho, that's some stuff. And I think it was Leah Remini was on Joe Rogan and talked about her time in the Church of Scientology, and that was pretty eye opening too.
Mhm.
I mean, they pay those people just less than minimum wage.
Oh my gosh.
Less than minimum wage.
But
It's
you can
crazy.
get that with any kind of belief system though, where you kind of get this kind of um idea where you need to give your power away to something else. I'm a big believer that you are your own best determiner of your decisions in your life, and you don't necessarily have to always um, find some external belief system to
Right.
tell you what to do.
Right.
Now
Yeah.
you can use
Sometimes you're good enough to make those decisions.
right.
And so when I hear people say that people use religion as a crutch, sometimes they do. Some people do. Do I think that all people do? No, but some people do. Um, but it's how it's used and how you act. It you need to change your perspective, and have, these epiphanies or whatever you want to call them, and make changes in yourself, and then maybe you can understand a little more. I mean, one of the big tenets of a lot of these religions, if you pay attention to it, is that they always tend to look at themselves as undivine, in the sense that there's always something new to learn. While there may be divinity inside, we're always a student while we're here.
Right.
And in some ways I agree with that, and in some ways I don't. Because if you look to the teachings of Jesus, I mean, even Jesus said, you're all the sons and daughters of God. You all have the same ability that I have. That was and that's one of his biggest messages, that Christianity just skips over. There's just like, that he told you he wasn't special. That you could all be just like him. Like that's, and it baffles me how a lot of these things, they just need to be brought to light, I guess, as far as I'm concerned. Because that's the way I see it. Like, it's sort of like, when I had the Bible shoved in my face, because I came from a Christian family. I didn't come from an Islamic family or a Jewish family or a satanic family. I didn't come from one of those. I didn't come from a family of witches or Quakers. But my grandmother shoved the Bible, probably the King James Bible. Great guy, by the way. Do a little look up on old King James. Then maybe you'll understand things a little better. But you read Genesis, and it's like Adam and Eve, only two fucking people on the planet. Then they have kids, two of them, two sons. And they send them off to a city. What? What city? They were the only two people on the planet, however many years ago, however old their sons are at that point. They probably shipped them off at age like 13. Oh, you got hair on your balls. Get the fuck out of here. Because that's what they were like back then. She's got hair on her vagina. Fucking sell her off to that guy next door. That's the shit they did.
Yeah.
And we're expected to believe that all this is still relevant. A lot of these things and a lot of these belief structures.
Well, that's
still
when, like,
relevant.
When a kind of, I don't want to single out anyone in particular, but many of them have points of view where if you kind of question the teachings, then you become some kind of heretic or non-believer. And I actually think that the kind of questioning things is a good thing, to really kind of look around and see, like, well, what is this going on?
You taking the time to read that, were you?
I was like,
I just totally threw Holly off by throwing that up there.
I was like, whoa. Well, and because I can't see any of the chat right now for whatever reason, so I haven't been watching
that doesn't come up for you. It only comes up for me. It's the same thing with the other guys.
Good.
When we do the show, you'd have to pop up the actual show to be able to watch the chat. But yeah. So my personal experience was with a Christian family. I'm not trying to demonize Christians. I think that Christians can be very good people. I think that things get perverted and things get turned into stupidity. I can remember going to my aunt and uncle's house and my grandmother's house on the weekends in the summer and so on and so forth. We were not allowed to play cards or board games on Sunday. because
Mhm.
that was bad. I'm like, so sitting down with my cousin and having positive interaction on the Lord's Day isn't good? Really? Like, so there are things that I had problems with growing up. Now, like I said, does that
Yeah.
mean I want to demonize Christianity? No. No, I think there are some very good people who are Christians. But I think that there's some problems. I mean, obviously, look at the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
So, but
And I
but
mean,
yeah.
my experience is similar too. Like, I also grew up going to a little white church in New England.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Most of my family attended there because I'm from a small town. Um, you followed what the book said, and it was kind of the end of the story. However, my dad actually was more free thinking.
I liked Andy
And
Dufresne's book with the fucking hammer in the middle of it.
yeah, my dad was more free thinking too, though. He and both of my parents would also wanted to understand, kind of had the belief that if you only know one, you know none. So they would encourage us, and they did on their own, learn about other things like Buddhism, um, Judaism, Kabbalah. Um, and I can distinctly remember my dad reading The Way of the Shaman, and meditating, and he and I never really talked about it until later in life. But I had the fortunate experience that even though my primary um, experience as a child was with Christianity, my family had enough openness that they would let me explore other things and find other teachings that maybe felt more um, correct to me, or not necessarily correct, but felt more like myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the big experiences, a kind of a personal story, is there are a lot of teachings in the Bible that are not favorable towards homosexuality, towards slave. They kind of, there are some things about slavery in there, and I had those experiences of like, I don't agree with that,
Yeah.
and having people in my family who are homosexual or have that lifestyle, like, I'm gonna love them. I am not gonna exclude them from my life.
Right.
You know, and if in if Jesus is saying to love everybody, I don't know understand why there needs to be 1,000 more pages about this.
Yeah.
Um, but that's me, and I am not the end of the line, and I am not the end. All I can do is make the right decision for me, and the one that I can live with. The
Yeah.
one that I can live with is being very, open and loving with people.
Yeah. and and I think for the most part, you and I are on the same page on a lot of those subjects or a lot of those ideas. And and when I talked to you about doing this,
Hmm.
I figured we could, just kind of either ramble or pick topics and
Hmm.
go down into certain areas and just really discuss them. But it's just I've always wanted to, on the 40 and slip, do something that had to do with these subjects, and I just haven't been able to.
Hmm.
I haven't been able
Yeah.
to. I mean, because a lot of times when there's certain topics on the show where I'll bring them up, and it's three guys. I
Hmm.
mean, at one point it was just Steve and I, but
Hmm.
it's a three guy show.
Hmm.
Um,
You got Katie now.
We do have Katie, and Katie's great. She's been awesome on the show. Um, and by the way, Katie's had a little bit of an issue going on. She's having a little rough time, so I want to just give a shout out to her that I'm thinking of her, and I hope
Oh.
everything's okay. I'm not gonna get into any details. I don't know how much she wants people to know about shit going on in her life, but I did want to tell her I'm thinking of her today. Um,
Oh, good.
so I hope things are going all right there. She was in the chat room, so uh, yeah. She and like her life hasn't gone to shambles. She's not like everything hasn't gone to shit, but
Hmm.
I didn't think it was like something that I couldn't bring up. But so yeah. So I wanted to do something that was more just gave me a little more freedom in this area. So I figured just doing it on those topics. And like I said, there's other things that we could go into, but I just think it gives it it's a different dynamic too, because it's not Steve and Matt and I'm not shitting on Steve the entire show. And vice versa or whatever. I just wanted to have because it's sort of like when I do the show with David. David was one of those guys who, whenever I would talk to him, we would have these long, intense discussions. And finally I looked at him and I'm like, dude, let's just do a fucking show. You know, why not just get it out? And those are the types of shows that I also like doing. I like doing the stuff where I'm being, having fun, joking around, and still talking about these topics. But I also like having in-depth discussions that don't involve a lot of the other part of it. Because I'm always going to be joking around and having fun. That's who I am. But that show is more designed for the joking around and having fun than deeply going into the topics. And not to say that we don't, but we tend to be assholes more than anything. So, and yes, James, me shitting on Steve is good podcasting.
He's
absolutely right.
He's not here to defend himself.
I don't give a shit. He won't either. But yeah, so we'll wrap this up. I just wanted to kind of introduce Holly to everybody and let you guys know we are going to try to start doing this show. And you said that Wednesdays kind of work for you?
Wednesdays work for me, yeah.
Okay, yep. So we'll try to do it Wednesdays. I'll try to pick a time with Holly, and we'll have a set time, kind of like we do 6:00 p.m. on Sundays for the slip of the 40 and slip. So, and I will be doing a bonus 40 and slip show. I'm not sure if it will be tonight. I have not heard back from Phil. Phil and I are going to do a show together. I'm kind of keeping the topic under wraps. But it's something that I've been wanting to talk about, and I kind of talk about every once in a while on the show. But it has nothing to do with 40 and topics. And Phil's the perfect guy to talk to about it. So I'm hoping that I hear back from him today and that we can do it tonight at some point in time. But if not, I'll figure it out with him. There is a bonus show. But if we can do it tonight, you guys get a twofer. It's a back-to-back. And we will I'll let you know whenever I know. So, but this has been Slip Into the Night, episode 0. How'd you feel, Holly?
It was fun.
Yeah.
And you know what? They can contact you through your Facebook page, right? If they have questions for us.
Oh yeah. Oh.
I don't know what questions they have.
What just happened? Did I lose Holly?
I'm right here.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, your audio went crazy.
Huh. That's weird.
Yeah, that's one of the things with this new software, StreamYard, that I've noticed. It does kind of fuck with your audio every once in a while.
Huh.
But yeah, they can ask us questions on YouTube, on Facebook. I have the Facebook like page, which I'll put the link to underneath all the shows anyway. So yeah, if you like this shit, hit the little thumbs up button. If you don't, hit the little thumbs down button as always. Subscribe. I'll do all the shameless plug-in. You can check out my good friend Matt Knapp at youtube.com/bigfootcrossroads and youtube.com/cryptid tales. One of the Bigfoot Crossroads is his podcast channel, and Cryptid Tales is his generally Bigfoot encounter stories channel. He does very well with that. People seem to like it. Matt has a great radio voice. He's got a really smooth voice, that Matt Knapp. Check out, hopefully you'll get to check him out later, but Phil Poling at youtube.com/parabreakdown. You can check out the podcast. I'm not sure if I'm going to add Slip Into the Night to the 40 and Slip podcast page, or if I'm going to make up a different page for it altogether. But you can check out the 40 and Slip at anchor.fm/the 40 and Slip. You can check out Bigfootin' with Keith and Colin. That's Richard's Facebook group on Facebook. And as always, check out Dred Funn, our good friend Dred Funn, who has been doing great, bouncing around to all the cons and selling his wares. That's youtube.com/Dred Funn and dredfunn.com. And I will talk to you all possibly later.
Bye.